with archery and all back.
Top air. What are you watching? Vlog watch?
Right, so quick review. We started by saying that quality of movement matters. I define that by, is it effective, efficient, stable, and adaptable? We look at it and review not just the quality of movement, but all things through a systems lens with a purpose is more important than the relationship between them and finding the parts. But this is the order in which we look at things. Within that, coordination is more important than shapes. There's three primary coordination patterns or secondary coordination patterns plus one tertiary pattern. What I forgot to put in there is the importance of individuality. And now we're going to talk about, all right, what to do. What do we do with all of that information? And how does it actually inform the work that we do? So, this is a George Box quote from a long, long time ago. Our models are wrong. Model is just a representation of the system. It's wrong, it's just a representation. It's just a small world representation of the real world. Because the real world is so complex, we can't understand it, we build models. So this is wrong, but it makes sense to me, and it helps my work, it's useful for me. May or may not be useful for you. But when I'm looking to impact or help understand players' movements, I use this model, what I call the capacity coordination continuum. It's factors that impact or inform, govern, or whatever, how an athlete moves. On one end of this continuum, you've got these capacity factors. On the other end, you've got the coordinative factors. Another way to look at that, these are the quantitative and these are the more qualitative. On this end, you've got the structural factors. On the other end, you've got the more technical factors. So let's start from this end. The structural factors are the inherent constraints of an athlete system. Height, weight, sex, motor fiber type, structure of the joints, limb lengths, bone, blah, 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 all of those stuff that makes us what we are, right? It's what an athlete has the potential to do. It's based upon their structure. You cannot move in a way that you do not have the structure for. Make sense? In the middle is the underpinning biomotor capacities and capabilities that are based upon these. So it's what an athlete actually has the capability, not just the capacity, but do they have the things and can do those things in a way in which they can actually go out and perform. So the examples here are force, velocity, control, endurance, and repeatability or range. And finally, why is this stars? The technical factors are the process by which athletes coordinate their bodies to achieve the specific movements. Is what they actually do. So examples here is self-organization, freezing and freeing of degrees of freedom, and specific joint angles through what we're asking them to do. As far as how it influences and impacts what we do, where do we tend to spend most of our time? Physical? Are you a S&C coach or a therapist?
That was me, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
S&C.
S&C? Okay. Anyone else say anything other than physical?
I'm not saying it's right, by the way.
No.
Sorry, I'm just saying.
But we spend most of our time in the physical domain? Yeah. Anyone disagree? We definitely don't spend a lot of time here, do we? We can't do anything really to impact it. People are going to grow older. We can't stop that. Males are males. Females are females in general. We can do a little bit to affect muscle fiber type, but not a lot, really. And it shouldn't really impact what we do. We can kind of impact specific joint structures in different ways. You've got the skills to do it, but it's not a focus for us. So typically, obviously this is a lot more important when you're working with growth and development of kids. So you need to understand height, weight, age. That's something that Simon's going to talk to you. But if you're with the first team, most of this is pretty irrelevant-ish. So we focus on these two things. The physical capacities and capabilities as well as the technical strategies that athletes have. So let's think about let's a simple task, a power clean. So SEC coaches probably thought of power clean before. How do we impact the technique of a power clean? Impact how an athlete moves. So how an athlete does the power clean. Is that through technical processes or more physical processes? Or is it a bit of both? A bit of both. Okay. What do we typically work on? Both. So we're getting stronger. The underpinning force capacities, force generating capacities, we try to build those up, get them as strong as we possibly can. We work on the rate of force development, so on and so forth. We also work on the more coordinative aspects of it, the timing of a lift, when you start your second pull, the position that you would be in when you're addressing the bar, the position that your shoulders are in when you start your second pull, the extension that you have, what you want to feel when you're doing this, where you are on the catch, how you recover, all of these different things, right? So it's always a bit of both. We have to determine, based upon our experience, based upon the athlete in front of us, what we're going to do the most of with each individual and each individual point. What I will argue is, we're talking about sprint speed. What do we focus on when we're trying to impact how an athlete runs or sprints? This one or this one? Especially the last sort of 5-10 years. I'd argue probably this one. Like we just kind of just do this. Okay, you gotta do this, you do that, and that's why I think we're just so confused as a community of coaches now about what do we mean by that? And you've got the whole sort of decontextualization and isolation of sprinting and how it transfers, isolated sprint training and how that actually transfers to playing the game. So there's a whole confusion and debate around that. There's also, what do we actually say about what do we pay attention to? What really matters technically? And is the things that I'm talking to, or are the things that I'm talking to, are the drills that I'm trying to do to try to impact sprint technique, how an athlete sprints or runs, is it actually doing what we think we're doing? Because we're operating here on a lot of basic, fundamental, incorrect assumptions. As we talked about before about these two, right? This is where these two come in. It's not just effective and efficient, but is it stable and is it adaptive? Can you actually do what I'm teaching you to do through my words in the context, in the environment that you have to do it in? So if I'm thinking, I'm speaking, say, dorsiflexion. Most people now know that dorsiflexion is important for running. And I'm working on dorsiflexion, my foot, blah, blah, blah. I know that this position is important. I know my arms doing this is important, so on and so forth. And I've got all these words, and I'm doing all this in isolationist fashion through the warm-up or through whatever. What is going to lead that to be an adaptable technique or skill? As I said, I think there's this, the work that we do, there's the way that they play the game, and there's this big gap in between that we don't understand. How are we actually changing, affecting, impacting this, how we move here, through our work here? And now, if you work with kids, you can see this. If you work with kids, like they're super plastic and they learn super quick, and you can actually impact how they move almost on a daily basis. If you work with first team players, how does that work? It's a different thing, right? It doesn't. You can't. Especially when, GA is probably a little bit different. In football, which is both NFL and European football, which is where I do most of my talks. At least 2/3 of all the players don't care. But they just don't care. They don't care about the words that you say. They're just there because they're told to be there. So, yeah, good luck then. So now you're working with 1/3 of the players that do actually care. And even then, we don't understand this gap. Because we want them, we don't want them thinking when they're here. They're just playing the game. So how are we impacting how they're playing? that leaves us only with this. The only way that we can impact how they play the game, both here, isolated from the game, decontextualized, and here, within the game, contextualized, is by impacting the underlying biomotor capacities and abilities. Not through the words that we say. The words that we say, kids, yes, we can impact it. It's important, the words that we say. But the rest of it is through impacting more capacity, more quantitative factors. That's how we impact most, and I would say for most people who are over the age of 18, most of the factors that improve or affect or impact how an athlete moves are more capacity related than they are technical related. Yeah.
Can you go back to your systems point, whereas if people are buying into the purpose and then your relationships there for that season?
Sorry, say it one more time.
I went fast.
No, I just couldn't hear you.
The purpose,
Yeah.
therefore, if you have a strong enough purpose within a group,
Yeah.
then instead of having 2/3 not switched on, you have.
Yeah, well, that's, yeah. So it's funny, Simon, again, we were talking about this last night. Like the biggest question I get from, almost the first question ever when I'm done is how do we get the athletes to buy into what we're saying? Like it's almost always that. Like they don't, you know, I've got a third of my players are interested and the other 2/3 are not. And that's, let me get to that because I do actually talk about that. Okay? Because I think that's obvious.
I was just wondering, purpose, surely purpose impacts this.
Yes, 100%. Gotta get to it. Good question. This for me, again, is speaking in general terms. Through development, it's kind of always both. This happens. It's why the strongest kids at 12 years old are also the fastest kids. Because coordination at that age isn't necessarily a limiting factor. They can get faster just by getting stronger, just by being able to extend their hip with more force, faster. They just develop these as they grow, right? There's a big debate here, or a big conversation to be had about where we feather the more technical, or sort of the more capacity work in. I'll give an example. Simon, you may have some thoughts on this. I coached, so when I was in Calgary, I coached track, football, soccer, bobsled, skeleton, alpine skiers. But I had 2 years where I actually coached speed skating, where not just the SEC coach for speed skating, but the technical coach for speed skating. And I had one athlete that I coached for 2 seasons. His name is Jeremy Rose. Jeremy's now the head coach of Oslo's in Norway, the Norwegian speed skating team. And Jeremy's also the best sprint speed skater in history. So he's won the most World Cup medals and the most World Cup gold medals in history of the sport. And he's known as the best technician ever. Like you watch him, it goes back to it just looks right, it just looks better. You know, you can just tell, you don't know what it is, it just looks freer and easier. Like he's just incredibly gifted from a coordinative perspective. He's got this. And he puts that down to him. He didn't lift weights and do any of this stuff purposefully until he was 18. So he's so reliant on his technique and his, his coordination, his timing, his rhythm. It's the only thing he had. So he had to develop all of these technical abilities. And then he feathered all his physical capacities and capabilities on top of that and became the best in the world instead. So I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had about the growth and development of this, because this is what we focus on, because it's the easiest thing to do. It's super easy to get a kid stronger. You can do nothing and get stronger. This is a lot harder. So I don't work with kids, but I just think it's a really interesting conversation. I think Jeremy's N=1 example is a really interesting one, and interesting to segue into that conversation. So I want to talk about this more specifically. So we've got our 3 secondary patterns. So hip extension, flexion, and foot to ground interaction. And you've got this tertiary pattern, spinal range. Okay? This is almost never an issue. This can be an issue, but we'll keep it there for now. This is an injury, an issue from an injury, a potential injury perspective, as we said in team sport. This is a performance perspective. If you look at just these two things now, hip extension and foot to ground interaction, where do they exist on this continuum? Hip extension pattern. How are you impacting the hip extension pattern? How are you impacting how the player moves through this pattern? You've identified hip extension as problematic. Do they work on hip extension through technical means, is what the things that you're saying? Through freeing up and freezing degrees of freedom? Or do you work on this, force, velocity, endurance, force, and control?
It's probably a bit of both.
Bit of both?
Maybe
Most.
if you had to pick between the two, hip extension more physical and the other more technical, but still both.
100%. And it's probably 90-10 and 10-90. It's a bit of both. It always is. But it's that dichotomous. It's that much of a difference. You impact hip extension pattern through more force, more velocity, more endurance, more repeatability, more range, and more control. And yet, this will also come along for the ride. You'll be more coordinated, all of those things. But this is how you impact that pattern. So you're changing how a player moves across all contexts, because this is based upon this stuff, which is independent of context. So if you're trying to change how a player actually moves in the game, this is the stuff. It's not this. You're trying to change technique through a coordinative perspective, what they're thinking about, the instructions that you're giving. That's not independent of context. That they can do in a controlled environment with you and isolated, by themselves and doing drills and things. They don't do that when you play the game. How we're trying to impact it across all contexts is through this. Foot to ground interaction is the opposite. Remember, we talked about the complexity of that pattern, right? So hip extension, pretty complex pattern, but it's just that. It's so reliant upon this, physical factors. This, the capacities, don't really limit this, the quality of it. This is all about coordination. We talked about it before, right? The ones who coordinate that movement, all of these different movements, and there's a lot going on, there's so much going on in that pattern, are the best at that. The ones who don't coordinate that well are the ones who get injured all the time. And it's sprinting, elite sprinting, track and field sprinting. The ones who do that well, as I said, are the fastest in the world. Let's focus on hip extension pattern. We'll come back to the foot to ground interaction pattern in a little bit. Let's talk about hip extension pattern, how we can impact that through physical means, or physical strategies. So we've got one of our three patterns, hip extension. We've got a bunch of ways that when we say, what's a better hip extension pattern? Let's say you've got a really bad hip extension pattern. What does that mean? What do I mean by that? Answer's right here. You either, or, and, lack the force-producing ability through that pattern, the velocity, the requisite velocity through that pattern, the repeatability, the range, or the control. So do you have the force to be able to produce that pattern? Do you have the velocity? Do you have the range? Can you control it through the range at that force and that velocity? And can you repeat it over and over and over again? These are the 5 things that determine what the effectiveness of a good pattern is, especially in hip extension. Right? At least when we're talking about the capacity of the pattern. Force, velocity, range, control, and repeatability. So then, it gives us now, okay, what is the pattern that we need to work on? You can't extend your hip very well, I can see that. You're just not producing enough. Projecting your center of mass into space. Why? A 13-year-old kid, you improve their force and they'll be able to hip extend that. Easily, right? It's very rarely a range problem with a 13-year-old kid. Often it's a control problem. They can't control it, they just don't have the coordinative abilities yet to control that pattern. This is where Bosch comes in, by the way. Bosch is just this. Bosch ignores all the other stuff. The other stuff is also important. Control is important. Great. Good. It's not just about control. You have force, velocity, range, repeatability as well. You have to be able to repeat that over and over and over again, especially in games that last 90 minutes, 2 hours. How long is the GA game? 70? 7 minutes. So then the question, when I've identified that you've got a poor hip extension pattern, which of these 5, and obviously almost always it's a bunch of them, and then what is the hierarchy of those 5? So these are your KPIs, right? These are your KPIs that you're working on to try to improve your hip extension pattern. 13-year-old is almost always force. A adult is often range. We can just build a better hip extension pattern if range is involved. So then we have to build our strategies around range. Okay, and what is that? We've got all those strategies that come off of this. Obviously, all of these also is part of the system. They interact and interrelate. They're always connected. You understand? Yeah? That makes sense? So far? I'm stalling because I don't know what's next. Let me see. So once we have, let's say we've set up our hierarchy and we say, let's say it's kids. So it's force, it's control, and let's say it's hip extension. It's force, it's control, it's repeat, and velocity, and range. And let's say that these aren't really, this isn't a big issue, these bottom 3, but force and control is. So we're going to come up with strategies to try to improve the hip extension pattern, this 13-year-old kid, through increasing their force ability, or force capacity, and their control. So that now speaks to what we do across the entirety of the system. That's what I mean by this. Where everybody's problems, or all problems, are everybody's problems. Hip extension is a problem. It's not necessarily a problem, I'm just saying if it's a problem. If we say, yep, hip extension is an issue, that becomes everybody's problem. Physio's problem, SSC problem, fitness coach problem, athlete problem, sometimes a parent's problem. It's everybody's problem, and we try to find system-wide strategies, implement system-wide strategies to try to solve this problem. This is the system. And I'll add one to this. So where are the inputs into the system in which we can improve the hip extension pattern? Pre-session warm-up. We're almost all doing some sort of movement prep now, right? We can individualize their movement prep to impact their force, and then maybe their control. So they got 15, 20, some of the professional football teams I'm seeing now have 30 to 40 minutes of movement prep before they're even starting the real warm-up. So what do we do there to impact them specifically as individuals? What are they doing in their warm-up? Can we individualize or group, categorize the warm-up somewhat? So if you've got 4 athletes or 4 players that have problems with hip extension force, they're doing one warm-up. You've got another 4 or 5 that have hip extension control issues, so on and so forth. You can have 2 or 3 warm-ups going simultaneously, quite easy, if you're creative with what you're doing. The primary session, which we generally don't have a lot of impact in. Some do. Some performance directors of professional teams have impact into the loading, through volume and intensity and so on and so forth. But there's an opportunity there. What we do in the weight room, for sure, right? So how are we affecting our force, capability, capacity of the hip extension pattern in the weight room? Rather than just building our weight room program on the fundamental movement patterns. Squat, pull, carry, rotate, push, whichever fundamentals that you define as your fundamental. Instead, hip extension is the one that's important. How do we do that? That's not really improving our hip extension. Yeah, we're extending the hip, but we're never getting the knee behind the hip, which is what we're actually trying to affect. Knee behind the hip. How well you can get your knee behind the hip. Deadlift, that doesn't do that either. So let's choose and select exercises where we actually have to get our knee behind the hip. Make sense? Understand? Medical. So what are the medical strategies? What are the physios doing to try to improve the hip extension capacity? There's all sorts of things you can do, right? So then that becomes, as I said before, like what are all the things that may be limiting hip extension from a medical perspective? Why are you yawning so much?
I've been up since 5 o'clock.
Are you? I'm trying to speak, I couldn't get the answers. Be a little bit more entertaining. I'll start yelling. What are the medical strategies? Is it soft tissue limiting? Is it structural limiting? Is it something else? Is it more longer chain, sort of multiple segment fascial related? What is that lack of hip extension ability coming from a medical perspective, and how can we get involved in that? And in the athlete's perspective, like what do the athletes do? As we've said, a third, typically in my experience, will really buy into this. And if I give them 20 minutes of homework, they'll do it every night. And then 2/3 don't. And this is how you actually build the buy-in, or you build the greater sense of responsibility that athletes need to have for their quality of movement, is when this is system-wide. When all problems are everybody's problems, including the athlete, they only hear one message. And they don't hear a different message every single day from a different person. Well, today we're going to try this. Today we're doing this. Today we're doing this. Today we're doing this. And they've heard it all before. All of them, even kids, they've heard it all before. It's just something different, and it just goes out. But if it's always the same, to say, Simon, your hip extension is not good enough, man. It's leading to this and this and that, and it's impacting your performance. And I say that, and the medical people say that, and it's all you hear is that, and all the strategies that are around in your entire system, from your movement prep to your warm-up, your primary sessions, your weights, and medical, and your homework, is about that, then you will eventually get it. Okay. They're not changing up on me here. They're not just doing a dance. Because often especially in first team sport, we feel like we got to entertain the athletes, right? We got to put on a top hat and a cane and do a dance for them. But it's the opposite. We just got to stick to the same 2 or 3 things over and over and over and over again. We have the same conversation with them over and over and over again, and they'll get it. And eventually, okay, this is a thing. I do have to do this. I have to be engaged in this, and you will see buy-in improve significantly through this. If there's consistency in the message from everybody across the entire system, and they're asked to be a part of it throughout the entire system. And the other one that's important, especially in GAA and with kids, is life. Like life sometimes gets in the way. I coach a few non-sponsored track athletes that work full-time. And many of the ones who work full-time are sitting all day. So if they're sitting all day for 6 hours, hip extension pattern is often an issue. So I have to build strategies into their life. Every 45 minutes or so, you got to get up and do some fascial stretching and reflex. And that's part of, if they're into it, they want to actually do something. It's system-wide. All of this, remember, is a system, right? How they connect is more important than each one individually. Usually, what we do is, I'm the S&C coach, this is my part, and I'm going to do that. And I ignore all this other stuff. Maybe I'll do this pre-session prep. Maybe I'll do these 2 things. But it's my impact on how they move is limited to 2 or 3 sessions a week, 45 minutes to 60 minutes a session, and that's it. That's not a systemic way of looking at it. That's a component part reductionist way of looking at it. That's your problem, is my problem, rather than my problem is everybody's problem. All solutions have to be everybody's solutions. Strategies have to be consistent across the entirety of the system. Does that make sense? This is key. Like, this is the most important thing. Yeah. I'll leave it there for now. I'll come back if I need to. So that's hip extension pattern. Let's talk about foot to ground interaction pattern. So hip extension, as I said, is primarily capacity related. You improve how they move through improving their capacity, impacting their capacity. It's context free. So moving by myself in an isolated way through warm-up, with you as just a coach, and me actually playing the game, it'll be the same. Because I've improved or made impact to the entire capacity of the system. Not just the coordination. Coordination's a totally different thing. So how do we impact coordination? Where's Simon? I'll wait for Simon, because he's, we were talking about this one last night, so it's, I'll wait for him to come back. Any questions on that so far? Anybody disagree with me? By the way, so my experience is, I've consulted now with, last count is well over 100 professional teams over the last decade. And there's 2 teams, and only 2 teams that have done this well. Like actually have a system-wide integration rather than being siloed. We've got our fitness here, S&C here, physio here, doctors here, whatever. Everybody's siloed. They think they're integrated, but they're not. They're really not. And there's only been 2 exceptions. So LA Rams was one. LA Rams changed almost overnight when they hired Sean McVay as the new head coach, and he was the youngest NFL head coach in history. 30, I think, when he started as a head coach for an NFL team. Shaking your head, because am I wrong? Did I get it
No,
right?
you're right.
Yeah, I think it was 29 or 30. He was super young. And then when I went there, he was 34. He was still a kid. And the performance director was also super young. He was like 40-something. And the entire group was, they'd come up in a new world. Rather than this old traditional siloed system. They were all new. And they were all like this. Like it was great. I've never seen anything work so smoothly and so efficiently, ever. Until I got to Arsenal. And Arsenal are just the same. And I was only there once when Wenger was the manager, so I can't speak to how it was prior. But Arteta's totally changed everything. Arteta, I don't know whether he speaks on this specifically systems, but like he has a morning meeting every single morning, and everybody's in that meeting. Like there's S&C coaches in his meeting. Like I don't know other manager that does it. It's typically they'll have morning meetings, and it's a manager. This is technical, tactical staff. It might be the doc, it might be the lead physio, and it might be the performance director, and that's it. But he's got S&C coaches and fitness coaches and physios in there, massage therapists, like everything. There's 18 people around the table, every single day having a conversation about all of this stuff. And all problems are everybody's problems. And it's really like every single player is brought in to go to your question. Because I went to Monaco a couple of weeks back. Not to be telling jokes, but about stories, but whatever. It's the opposite. Like it's very, very silent. And the question was, these players just don't want to hear from you. They're not listening. What's the answer? Well, get a new player is the answer. Get players, recruit players who are going to buy into what you're selling. But first of all, you have to be selling something. And if you're saying one thing, you're saying another thing, you're saying another thing, and it's all in separate rooms with separate people, it's never going to work, ever. It has to be, we've got a consistency, it has to start from the top, and it has to be system-wide where they can understand what the purpose is. And they can lock into that purpose over and over and over again. At each level of complexity, entirely new properties appear. I just want you to think about what that means to you. And then what that means as we go forward. And I'm going to talk briefly here about a typical way in which we as a community or an industry in sport performance and health have looked at things. This is a terrible paper, by the way. This is Jan Ekstrom's paper on hamstring injuries, or he looked at a bunch of injuries in the English Premiership. Again, in soccer, I couldn't find any GAA stuff. I didn't have time to put together all of this stuff with GAA. But this is football in the Premiership for 20 years. So they found that hamstring injuries increased from 12% in 01-02 to 24% in 21-22. There's a lot of goes into that. The game has changed a lot. The players have changed, the tactics have changed, the amount of games they play has changed, how they actually report injuries have changed. As I said, there's a lot of problems with this, but I don't think anyone will say that we've done a good job of dealing with hamstring issues in team sport, even though there's been so much focus on it for, I don't know, 15 years. Opar's paper, David Opar's paper came out in 2014, his initial one on fascicle length and noise, right? So it's been at least 10 years, and we were talking about it prior to that. And they definitely haven't reduced. So you can argue whether it's been 12 to 24 to higher to lower, whatever, but we're not doing a good job. This is typically how we've looked at things. 85% of all soft tissue injuries are lower body. Okay? Most of those are hamstrings, specifically long head biceps. Most. I say most because there's different numbers out there, you know, depends on who you listen to and what they did. Most of those long head bicep injuries occur at foot to ground interaction pattern. Anywhere between sort of 55% and 75%, depending on who you listen to. So it's from there, from the block to there. Right? So it's terminal swing and breaking phase. Most of these hamstring issues are right there. Why? Because of the significant eccentric load in that position. Yeah? We get that? So what's the answer? Pretty proud of this slide, which pretty cool, eh? You mind Young have that?
I did not.
No.
No animation.
He says Mike Young slides are better than my slides. So I gotta work in my slides. So we see all this. What do? A lot of lower body, a lot of hamstring, generally occurring about the same point because of this high eccentric load. So what's been the solution?
Eccentric training. Eccentric training.
Specifically,
Nordics.
that's our solution. What's the problem with this?
Can I have a question on this?
Can you have a question?
That I've always had about this. I've never got Nordics. I'm not saying they're wrong. The thing I don't understand about it is that we're trying to prevent something where the force is being placed in a totally different vector. So you're trying to train the hamstring eccentrically, but the force is generally coming from the ground up, or the other way around, and we're doing it with horizontal force instead of vertical force. So it didn't make sense to me.
At each level of complexity, new problems emerge. So every complex system nests within other complex systems and has complex systems nesting within it. This exercise is a complex exercise. It nests within a more complex movement, which nests within a more complex movement, and you can still keep on going out and out. We can understand this, we can control this, and we can predict this. With each level of complexity, with every level that we zoom out, reduces our level or our understanding or our ability to control, understand, predict. So we focus on this. Because of one study, essentially. So we had this entire thing that started here, it went to here, it went to there, it went to there, it went to here. Oh, there's high load, so we'll do noise. This is the very definition of a reductionist solution to a complex problem. This is trying to affect capacity, coordination. Which one? Capacity. But it's a coordination problem.
But
We've misidentified what the problem is.
it doesn't have, like, can be part of a program, you know.
Absolutely.
It's not wrong. It's working on.
No, it's not necessarily wrong in and of itself.
It can
But
work
if
in
you
the process.
misidentify what the problem is, and this is what we've done as an industry, Hamstring problem is a lack of capacity. We just gotta get stronger, or more range, or more whatever. It's not a capacity issue. It's a coordination issue. This is a coordination pattern. That's a capacity pattern. This is all about coordination. We've talked about how complex that pattern is. Capacity's got nothing to do with it. If it did, the strongest people would be the fastest people. And they're not. It's how coordinated you are through that pattern. It's really, really complex. So how do we solve then that coordination problem? All this does is adds fuel to the fire. This is why we get repeated hamstring, because we're just chasing more and more capacity, and we're not building the coordination to handle that capacity. It's like putting a Ferrari engine into a Toyota chassis. It's not going to work. You have to build chassis. I'm not saying it can't be a part of it. It's not a part of it for me at all. I've coached, and it is different. Like it's for not 1 second am I comparing what I do in a quite controlled way, you know, elite sprinting, with team sports and the chaos and the complexity that happens within team sports. I understand it's very, very different. But I've had 2 hamstring tears in the last 10 years. That's it. I've never done a Nordic. Never.
I think we also need to separate probably this as a exercise and this as a test,
Yeah.
because if we're rehabbing somebody back to performance, we need some sort of degree of measure of how well they're coping with eccentric force.
Yeah.
And to be able to put a number on that and to be able to make sure that they're within some sort of range of your agreed KPI.
So let me play devil's advocate. I say no, you don't. So how many players have you seen that don't have the capacity that never have a hamstring issue? I've seen lots. Andre de Graaf's a guy that I coached for 3 years. He's got 3 Olympic medals. Like 220 watts. Like he couldn't do this at all. He could do that like nobody on the planet. That is what I'm training for, not this. This is very, very different. It's a proxy. Is it a good proxy? I would argue against that. I don't think it's a good proxy.
Right, okay, but for Andre, if he did tear his hamstring, how do you gauge when to allow him to max speed run?
Not through capacity.
So
Yeah, there's some capacity things that you have to look at, right? You have to look at tissue damage and how the tissue is progressing and so on and so forth. But if it didn't get injured because of a lack of capacity, why are we testing its progress on capacity? It got injured because of a lack of coordination. And that could be due to down to fatigue. It could be due to all sorts of other things, right? It could be he lacked the coordinative ability on that day because he didn't sleep well the night before. He had a fight, wasn't hydrated, wasn't whatever. That can affect coordination, as we know. It's not capacity.
But once he's injured, he then has a capacity issue. Once he becomes injured.
Yes.
So he has
If there is detraining of that.
If he has a structural
Correct.
injury,
If
he
there's-
then develops a capacity issue from a coordination injury. So then how do you gauge how to get that person back without performing the test?
They're always that way. Right? That's why I said it's not 90-10. I mean, capacity is an issue of this. How do you? I do it through qualitative ways. Remember what I said about this was quant, and this was qual up here? This is how I return play. I mean, I can talk about that specifically if you want to, if you're interested, and how I do it. But that's, yeah, I'm happy to do that actually.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
Can I
Please do.
put a little, right, so you can answer that question. I presume that's the next phase of this, is what you do instead of that, yeah? What would you do instead of that? Do you understand the mechanisms that Stu's been through for the last half an hour of this? What would you do? What exercise would you guys come up with? It's not a question. Everybody stand up. I'm not joking. Here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Groups of 4. See if you can come up with 2 exercises. We have a whole weight room and lots of space in here.
can't be a Nordic. You can't choose a Nordic.
We got blue hammies over there. I think my I don't know the answer.
I will say yes, Mongolia way. Yeah.
Yeah, no. What's this called? What?
What about even RDM? Could we sound close? A good one for.
Calvin Phillips just scored a quick fire goal. 2-2.
So when you're talking slides, you're talking Hemsbridge. Yeah. Does that make sense? I feel like we do. I'm not sure about Marty's team at the back. Do we have a skill we're going to work on? Right. Boys at the end. Can everyone crowd round here? We're going to have a little demonstration of your idea here at the end, if that's okay. We're going to call you guys. I'm feeling happy today, so just to annoy Stu, we're going to call you guys Casemiro.
So we went, probably later than this, but this was the latest one I could get, but something tonight, we could work on control, we could actually support from there, and it'll be coming out into that eccentric phase to snap back. So working on your position of where you take the foot, working on where you take it, but kind of focusing on control. Maybe something, maybe just add a wee bit eccentric, I think, for perturbation that we're not trying to control.
Nice. Any thoughts? Do we have any? Yeah, positive, negative, not particularly negative, but any ideas of how that fits?
I suppose it depends on the severity of what actually happened, because that emotion might not be there for 6 days, where there's emotions you could do from 6 hours a year. Well, sure, there is
Could you do that really slow?
an emotion you could do.
What if you just did that really slow?
I just made that, yeah.
So you can still do the movement,
Yeah.
just maybe just do this faster.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think we might do a whole little toolbox here. Yeah, good job. Thank you. Next group, we will. Oh, Marty's group. Marty's group. You guys got a little bit of sour action going on at the back end.
So ours was very similar to that. The only difference is that we were in a forward leaning against the bar. So we're working through a similar mechanism of that with the back.
Do we have a band?
Yeah, with the band around the foot.
Yeah.
But you're just in a forward leaning position.
Do you want to demonstrate?
Probably more in an acceleration. So whereas theirs is maybe better because it's probably more mimic in the upright running mechanics. Maybe where you're going to.
So, better or worse, it could be a different part of the continuum.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than better or worse.
Depends where you pick up the injury, where the injury occurred. So having the like when that upright running. So ours is very so we're starting in that position, so you're in that forward lean. You're coming from the band's not long enough, but you're coming from here, you're gonna drag back and then control that flexion movement. So you're not letting the band just whip you through, you're working on that slow control through. Lift back.
And we have knee behind the hip as well.
Where is there is a question, more load on the hamstring in either an accelerated position or an upright position? Long head biceps. You guys understand? You guys understand? Upright? Any other answers? Anyone think accelerated?
I would expect it to be you pushing behind yourself, so I would expect it to be in an accelerated position.
Yeah, it's actually an accelerated position. So there's, because I always thought, as most, that it was more low upright. But being in, like, basically what they're showing, never submitted, which is the more of a torso angle there is, the more tension you put on the hamstring, is biarticulate. And this angle affects the rest of the length of the hamstring significantly more than the knee angle. So it's the accelerated position is actually, it's one of the reasons why kind of people get hurt in this area, not necessarily always in this area, it's kind of this like mid-range accelerated position where a lot of sport happens. Not there, they're not there, they can be.
Love that. Right, let's go with the Murdoch group. Still see Ryan.
My thought was dribbles, just start with dribbles, because it's going to mimic more so as to what maybe was the issue. Okay, obviously dribbles will get to, so you can start over ankle very slowly just to see can you tolerate it. You'll obviously can move up through the different sequences, but then you can start to add a sled to the body, so you're starting to have to put more pressure in the floor to get away. So you're starting to put more work through that extension pattern, and you're just training coordination at the same time. And that's wrong.
Do you want to get a slide to demonstrate?
No.
Can everyone go around that end? I like the practical one. You're just lucky you're not falling Guess what we go with this? Let's go with some dribbles. Maybe just down to the box. And one of the back around the outside.
No pressure.
No pressure, but just spirit. Okay. Nice. Good effort. Kind of warms us in here. Who do we get? Couple of extra volunteers to come and be a demo. White training. The boss. Dan. Thank you. Sorry, what's your name?
So let's watch, try to analyze, and tell them how bad and how great they are. No pressure. All right, what do we think? Anyone disagree? It's one of the best dribbles I've ever seen from a staff member. Good job.
No, you're taking the piss.
No, it's great. It's really good. It's really good.
Video never. Thousand years ago, I was the best dribbler
Yeah, sure. You were. Okay. What do you think? Good, bad, and different? Give a score out of 3.
I think we've had a 3. I think this is a 2. That'll be my.
What can you do better? Let's do it again, come back. First of all, why is he looking at the ground? Don't look at the ground. Do it again. Did that change anything? Got one good leg and one bad leg. Left leg is a little bit. Change. But what is consistent between both legs? Kind of overly blind flex, kind of a little bit toey. Doesn't really complete the cycle. He's for example, can't dance. It's okay, not everybody can dance. It's okay. But this highlights a problem that maybe we'll see here. I can't remember what you look like. So maybe we'll see this being better or worse or the same as that. But let's, yeah, let's see.
Well, I'm the one there, three of us agree.
Well, I didn't say that I wanted to. That was Simon. He's being very generous. Okay, so on the technical, remember, go back to the model. On the technical thing, I said freezing and freeing with degrees of freedom. Right? Everyone understands what I'm saying by that? So, if you go again, do you see freeing or freezing of the lower body joints? You see dribbles. How coordinated it is. More coordinated movement, you'll see more freeing with degrees of freedom around all the joints. It'll look more coordinated together. And the less coordinated people on this specific task, you see more freezing. So look at a little bit freeing in the right knee, none the left. Left knee stiff, right? A little bit movement in the ankle, but the left knee doesn't move at all. So it's just this hip on the left. The right knee moves a little bit. So it's For me, if he dribbled like that and he's a professional player, I'd be concerned. No disrespect. I'm just saying like this. I would be. Does he have left hamstring issue? He will if he doesn't. It's through that specific act because he's not allowed to. He's just got so much coke and trash around his left knee, so he's just elongated the entire knee, and he's just doing this. And it's so much more load for the tissue. Sorry, son. I didn't mean to.
My hammy hurts just from listening to you talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But you highlighted there, and this is like I'm glad you said that because this is one of my solutions and one of the strategies. But this highlights one of the problems with that strategy. Because as a staff, if you cannot teach it, it's really hard to get it across to people. And if you've got a player, let's say, let's say you were the player. Are you a player now? Yeah. Yep. Ish. Yeah, it would be, if I'm trying to teach you how to dribble, like, you probably did this and didn't feel super coordinated. Right? Accurate? And you probably felt fairly coordinated. So we can do that, and you'll be confident doing that, and you'll be happy to do that more. Because you feel athletic. You wouldn't. If my entire session with you over the course of an hour made you feel discoordinated and bad about yourself, how are you going to buy into that? You're not. And this is one of the issues. If we can't demo it properly, and if the players can't do it well, we're doing the wrong thing. And a heuristic that I live by is the athlete should, or the player should never feel like an idiot. If you feel like an idiot, it's too hard. You should feel like, as an athlete, you should feel like, this is hard and challenging, but if I practice, I can get better at it. Challenge practice, one of my hypothesis. But if it's over the other side and just feel like an idiot, I don't feel athletic. It's the wrong thing. We have to. So what the question then to you would be, if that's the case, that's your player. He feels like an idiot. You come back to it, you can see it in his body language. Maybe he doesn't say, I don't feel like an idiot, but you can see it that it's not going to be it. How would you then regress? Would you regress or would you go sideways?
Do it in a dark room, I don't know. It's a good question.
But it speaks to, every strategy's got to be individualized for the player.
Before you say what you would do, without being right or wrong, I've no idea. My strategy
That could be a strategy. We can try it.
It's a great shape.
Yeah, we can try it.
Because
Absolutely.
I like to see, I like to get the kid, the player, I call you all kids, to feel what it feels like to do it right, and to get into that, the thing that Stu was saying about you feel coordinated. If we can reduce the skill slightly, so there's a moment where you feel free, you feel, oh, that's what it feels like. The brain's amazing at solving once it has feeling. It's like the sixth dimension almost of the brain. And it can kind of compute and put it all self-organized. If you give it a snapshot of that, I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, I like to do
If
that.
you did it via a swimming pool, like not even drills, like literally be like, okay, you've got to put it up to here, so your constraints obviously going to be the water, but it's also your leader because it feels that wee bit free or something like that.
Okay, fantastic. Do you guys have a curve treadmill? Do you have a treadmill? Is it here? Or is it somewhere else? So if you've got any treadmill, you can prop yourself up and you can do this. And you can just unweight yourself. Like a curve treadmill is perfect. But you can actually do it. So swimming is a great one, or in a swimming pool is perfect. If you want to just to regress, you can move it sideways and do something different. Okay, that's not working. So, but if you just want to regress, go to the pool, go to a treadmill, prop yourself up on a treadmill, and just unweight yourself by 50%, and then you can do it. Then you can freely, and you can actually go through.
Gravity,
Yeah, just like that, absolutely, 100%.
Just regress and make the right shape, and then apply something a little bit.
Now, there's some complexity to this we're going to get to next, because we've already talked about decontextualize and isolate, and it's not actually changing what actually happens in the game contextually. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Do we have a fourth group? Is that free? Do we miss one?
Yeah, we did concept. This
Did it?
Where's John?
Wait to see it.
Wait, exactly.
Good.
We're going for a bad Marshall.
Good?
Yeah, good. I like the man in mind idea because it creates us to create a bit more of an angle.
There's a man overhead.
Why is the man doing it?
Brings the body slightly more forward. Like the bars and having around your hips and around, but body has more body. Draw your chest on forward a bit more. Sort of like Julie there in what's the word that?
Even pelvic position, just trying to naturally keep it.
What if you have somebody who extends through lumbar, has good hip extension ability and gets extension through lumbar extension? Then that's the last thing you want to do is put the bar above your head, right? Because that's just putting it more into lumbar extension. So then you do the opposite. So you get a net ball and hold it like this and forcibly extend while in a flexed spinal position. This is why I don't like this as a generality. Because a lot of players will extend through lumbar and not hip. Because this is that's the position that puts it in. This is an issue for people who don't do well through lumbar and can extend through hip. If they already extend too much through lumbar, then you want to take that out and force them to extend through hip. Think about things you can do in the weight room in your free-wheel work.
Free will is just work these days. It's just work.
All right, so a quick sit down. I want to talk about that specifically now. There's a problem in this. Son, a great little aside, little practice, because we were going to do that later anyway, so it was great to do that there. Better. So we said, if we make a change to capacity, it's context independent. It changes how you move regardless of the context. If you're making trying to change coordination, it's totally dependent on context. So I can do this in a really closed, safe environment. But just because I can do that and I can do some dribbles, I can do this, do whatever with the dribbles, doesn't mean I can actually sprint properly in the game when I'm not thinking about doing it, right? Because it's technical. It hasn't affected the skill. So what does that mean? So this is something that we all learn, whether you're a physio or an SSC coach, you learn day one, is the relationship between load and adaptation. The load of a thing and the adaptation to that thing. And it's very simple. The higher the load, sorry, let me just go back to this. Let's think about, Simon wants to move his back squat from 200 kilos, right? 250? 250 kilos. Currently he's got a 250 kilo back squat. He wants to back squat 300 kilos. Okay? If we look at the magnitude of that load and the frequency of that load and graph it, where's it going to be on magnitude? So this is high magnitude, this is low magnitude. If we want to elicit an adaptation that's going to lead to a 50 kilo jump in his back squat, high magnitude or low magnitude, the type of work that we're going to do? High, right? High, has to be high. And then frequency? Low or high? Do we do it a lot or do it infrequently? Low. So that's probably somewhere around here, right? Really high magnitude work, really, really low frequency, meaning we do it every 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 12 days, whatever, 14 days. It's not very frequent. So the density pattern is really broad, it's really wide. Because the magnitude of the load is super high. Let's say we want him to work on a coordinative aspect, like he has dribble stuff. And we want him to be able to dribble better. Is a dribble high magnitude or low magnitude? It's low, right? Down here. So then the frequency must be, to elicit an adaptation to that, the frequency must be high. And this is what we forget. It's a very simple relationship. If you've got a low magnitude load, you have to do a ton to elicit any sort of adaptation. So if you're trying to build a better coordinate pattern through something that's really low magnitude, you gotta do it all the time. All the time. Not 3 days a week for 5 minutes. Or 3 days a week for 10 minutes. It has to be there all the time. So if you feel like that is important, and again, it's always, this sport, or this industry is always about what can we throw out that does not matter right now? And what do we focus on that really truly matters? And often it's like 2, 3, 4 things, that's it. That's it. And we focus on that until it doesn't matter anymore, and then we do something else. But let's assume that you've got some hamstring issues, or you're trying to improve your performance, or try to improve your speed, and you've got great hip extension, and you've got, all the other patterns are good, but this isn't great. And we've identified that that's an issue for you. How do we get better at that? How do we ensure that doing it here in this decontextualized, isolated way, and this big gap, how do we make sure that we get across that gap so we've actually changed how you move within the context of the game, which is what we're trying to do, which is what Marty was talking about earlier. We can't only do this, because the lag between doing this and actually affecting this from a coordinative perspective, from a qualitative perspective, is really, really long with adult athletes. With kids, it's not. With kids, it's almost weekly. You can change technique and coordination that quickly. So if you feel like, okay, I've chosen the dribble as my strategy, and it's Marty, and Marty, you didn't feel like an idiot, it was hard for you, but I can tell you didn't feel like an idiot. It was probably about the right challenge. That if we worked on that for 15 minutes every single day, in 2 weeks you'd be an expert dribbler. You'd be really good. And with you, it might, I don't know. Like yours weren't very good. So we need to maybe regress a little bit or go sideways and do something slightly different. Maybe we do the band exercise, which was good. But if that's all we're doing, we need to find something else that's a little bit closer to the task. Because that can't be it, right? We can't just do that faster and faster and faster, because it's not sprinting. It doesn't abide by the rules of dynamic correspondence. So my point to that is sometimes we forget about this relationship. We do this really well, but if something's low frequency, we have to do it all the time, like all the time. If we're expecting an adaptation, we have to do it all the time. It has to be super, super frequent, especially with, again, players who are 18 and above. That's the simplest thing. As I said, we kind of learned that on day one, but we forget it. We just put some dribbles in the warm-up, and we've got, 25 seconds of dribbles 3 times a week, and we're making a change. We don't. It doesn't happen. It doesn't. Any questions on that? Do you want to, let me go into something. Because we've got a lot of physios here. How many different gait patterns can you name? We've talked about them today. So we go walking. So that's one. At some point, if I get faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, I can't walk anymore. So what happens when I can't walk at a higher and higher and higher velocity? You start to jog. And I start jogging. And at some point I get faster and faster and faster and faster. And what happens? Striding? I think somebody else said another one. No? You jump ahead. You run. And then we stride. And then if you're fast enough, what happens after that? Sprint. Most people on the planet, have these two. Okay? Some people can run. Most athletes can stride. And very few people can actually sprint. I'll tell you through the differences here in a second. So, if you look at the literature on gait, and a lot of the ways in which we move from one to the other, the original research was kind of walk, run, sprint. Then they identified, no, it's actually more than that. There's a difference here between running and jogging. So jogging is in there. So jogging is actually, just like walking and jogging are two totally different and independent, unique coordination or movement patterns, so is jogging from running. So what's the difference between walking and jogging, primarily? Biggest difference? You leave the floor. Double support, right? What about jogging to running? What would you think? So you walk up to about what is speed? No? It's about 25% of your maximum sprint speed-ish. Okay? You walk up to about that, so which is about 2.5 meters per second. Ish. If you're 10 meters a second, like Simon. But about that. Okay? We've got a jog, and jogging occurs somewhere between 25% to about 55%. And you jog. And then you run up to about 75% of your maximum sprint speed. Now I'm saying you may not be able to go faster. You may not have the coordinate ability and have that pattern available to you. But that's about where it ends up. What is the transition between this and this? Between jogging and running. So how you jog. And then how I run. What's the difference? Stride length, one of them.
Hip extension.
Hip extension.
Speed.
Speed for sure. Technically? Yep. So heel, contact first. Primarily flat foot because of velocity. Where you contact on the ground, on your foot, is determined by the horizontal velocity primarily. Slower you are, the more heel you are first. Faster you are, the more towards the front of the foot. So we go from a heel rocker, there's a full roll, to a flat foot, and a much more balanced stride. This is backside dominant, this is balanced, this is more front side dominant. The difference between a sprint and a stride is all of these is a spring mass, right? So you hit the ground, forces go up, mid-support, it's at its peak, it comes down on the other end, and your system operates as a spring. That's all the way to here. And for years, for decades, we were operating as a spring mass system. That's what everybody thought about gait. Until Ken Clark came along and Peter Wayne in 2012, and they started doing this research, and they actually found out with elite sprinters, it wasn't a spring mass system, it's what has been called a two-mass system. So you actually have a second mass that peaks a little higher, drops down, and then you've got the spring, the entire rest of the system that comes online. And this mass here is the second mass, or the foot and shank. And this, with elite sprinters, is somewhere about 8% of the total ground reaction forces over the course of the stride. And the rest of it is the spring mass, about 92%. Now this is for elite sprinters or elite team sport players that can hit a certain velocity. And it's about 95% or so of maximum spin speed. So most players, most people don't have the ability to even get there. Most people don't apply force, high enough forces, fast enough to actually have that second mass. So that's why most of what we're rehabbing people to do is striding, not actually sprinting. Just an interesting aside. So what do we do from, this is why I asked about physio, or why I said about physio. What do we typically, we've just had what you guys are using over here, using the UKA system, like 2C, 2B, still using it. So grade 1, grade 2, grade 3.
Bannock, yeah.
For the Bannock, if they're being scanned, and if you're just doing it clinically, then probably the unit classification if you're.
Okay. Well, let's say you've got let's just say, for simplicity's sake, a mid-grade hamstring tear. How are we returning them back to, what are we doing here? We want them to be able to stride, correct? Before they play the game again? And for some players, maybe sprint, if they can sprint. So to do that, how do we get there? Remember, so stride is 85% to 95%. Oh, and by the way, actually, let me, this may be too much detail, too much information, but I think it's really interesting, and I think it's good to know, like really, really good to know. This is 0, let's say that's 25% of maximum sprint speed. And I've got faster and faster and faster. If you went out walking this afternoon or this evening with your grandmother, you're walking like this, how stable and efficient does it feel like for you to walk this slow? Like not as stable or efficient as if you were just walking without your grandmother and you just self-select or self-organize towards the velocity that's most efficient for you. So we do, right? You're just walking, everybody's got a slightly different resonant step frequency that maximizes for efficiency. And if we have to go any slower than that, it's a little less stable. This is stability. Sorry for my chicken scratch. And this is velocity down here. So any less or any slower than this, and it affects my stability of that movement. As I get faster and faster and faster, I've gone off the top of the inverted U and I'm becoming less and less stable again. As I get to a point where, this should be good. I can no longer walk. And it's still a phase transition between this coordination pattern and a different one, in this sense, jogging. So I'm walking as fast as I can, and at some point, I have to start to jump. And there's an abrupt change there that happens between those two coordination patterns. I can't just walk faster and I'm now at 50% of my maximum speed. I have to do something different. And that's the same between all of the gaits. They are all a very different coordination pattern. Meaning, we do different things in different ways with our system. As I said, this is different from this, which is different from this, which is different from this, which is different from sprinting. They're all totally different coordination patterns. So then I'll ask you the question, what are we doing typically to get back to this, return to play after a mid-grade hamstring tear? Typically. I'll tell you what I see mostly. We do a velocity-based progression. We'll start walking, we might do some drills, Eventually we'll start jogging when we can jog. We'll do some cool stuff. When we can run, we'll start running. And eventually we stride. And then once we can stride, and we show that we can do this 2 or 3 or 4 times, all right, you're clear. You can go and play again. What's the problem there? This coordination pattern is different than everything that came before it. And all we've really done to prepare the tissue, the coordination of that movement, is what we've done here, because all of this is different. We haven't actually affected the capacity of the tissue, and again, this is what Marty was talking about before. We have to be able to affect that in some way, and we're not. This is, for me, this is one of the reasons why we see so many re-injuries of hamstrings, because we're not actually preparing the tissue to do what we're trying to get them back to stride. Not jog and run. Yeah, we spend a lot of time jogging and running and even walking. But typically we don't injure our hamstrings jogging, walking, and running, it's striding. And we've waited 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks before we do this. So we've got all of this detraining, this massive gap in the coordination and the specific capacity of the tissue to coordinate in this specific way. And we've only done like a week of that. Aren't you good? You've proved to me that you can stride now. Off you go. But the tissue's not ready for it. The coordination's not ready for it. Right, sir?
Sorry, are you saying so if you were like doing drills the way through that progression, that
You might have to do like a velocity-based progression as well, because you've got all these capacities that you still have to make sure that don't get detrained in this gap. But if coordination was the problem, we have to find a way to work on this specific coordination of this, which was what you guys were coming up with. This could be one, this could be one, the dribbles. We need to actually, through this period, find ways to train the coordinative aspect and not just the capacity aspect. And what I'm saying is most teams don't do it. Most teams it's just capacity, as I said. We just train capacity through volume, more intensity, so just getting faster, higher velocities. And we're doing isolationist, reductionist stuff with Nordics, with RDLs, with whatever other reductionist solution that they've got to the wrong problem. That make sense?
yeah,
So this is where it has to be all throughout all this. I'm not saying not do the capacity, you have to do that still. Because you don't want these massive training gaps. But what you also have to do is ensure that you're actually returning people to do this, not just to do this. So you don't want to lose this, the 6 to 8 weeks of coordination issues. You don't want to lose that and then just do that 2 or 3 times and clear.
Yeah, I was thinking, I get what you mean now, but I thought maybe the coordination drills for striding was different than coordination drills down through, but you can
No,
actually
same,
get them the
same,
same.
yeah, yeah.
So
It's the
and
same,
just
so-
more repetition of it.
So I didn't prepare this as a slide. So apologies. This is one of the ones I did for Edge Monaco. So on the top, this is a walk. These are 3 very different patterns. There's a jog. There's a run. You can see the velocities. You see the difference in contact times. You see the difference in vertical forces. Nothing that surprising there, really. Okay, everyone sees that. This guy's going to be a little while, so I'll just move on to the next one. These are the 3 types of dribbles. You guys are all familiar with these. So we've got an ankle dribble, a calf dribble, and a knee dribble. So you can see the different velocities again, different contact times, different magnitude of vertical force. This is now a run. Compared with a knee dribble, compared with what we're actually getting ready to do, which is strut. So, eye test again. What looks better? What looks closer to this? These are the same velocity, 5.6 and 5.7. What, from a coordinative aspect, compare that, which would be the typical return to play progression through velocity, with that, which is the dribble. What looks like actually the coordination of what we're actually returning them to do? Obviously this, right? Like this is a very different pattern. Same velocity. Contact time significantly different. Force is very different, fairly similar because it's the same velocity. But this and this, I see the connection. And we just lose the significance of this. That is not loading that pattern, the foot to ground interaction pattern, at all. And if all we did with it was this for 6 weeks, from a capacity perspective, we no longer applying the capacity, loading the tissue in a very specific way through that pattern that it's got injured for because it didn't have that capacity. Instead, we're doing this or this. It's not enough. Make sense? So, the other one, and as I said, like this is, I'm glad you guys came up with some different ways. That was a really good idea to get you guys coming up with other solutions. Another solution that I often go to are scissor bands. So this is specifically working on the foot-to-ground interaction pattern. And now, it doesn't require, this is probably what I get you to do, it doesn't require quite as much coordination, because it freezes the knee. But it's the same sort of patterning, terminal swing and break. So it's similar. So for me, I do dribble bounds and scissor bounds. Sorry, dribbles and scissor bounds. As well as sort of typical weight room loading. And then through all of the other capacities.
Stu,
Yes, sir.
as part of this, maybe mistakenly, we have literally on the step just before this in our rehab program, we do it uphill. To reduce slightly the eccentric forces.
Yeah, great.
Forces. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. For sure. You would do that pretty early.
So what do you do uphill? Like scissor bounds uphill?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you've got an appropriately graded hill to be able to do that, fantastic.
So would you go like your dribbles, then scissor bounds,
Yeah, as it
hill,
get-
and then
I
Flat
yeah,
surface?
we change over when it goes from really making shape to starting to add a little bit more velocity and a little bit more impact of the knee bounds.
Yeah.
Knee dribbles. And we also bound a bit.
I'm coming to the end. Fine.
I'm going to go bit by bit through all of your papers and
Great. And we can talk about more practical stuff if you guys want to. As I said, I'm here for as long as you need me to. We've talked a lot about sort of complexity, the complexity of that and different things in this complex system. Not all systems are complex. Not all domains are complex. So you may be familiar with these terms: clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. Anyone familiar with those? No? Essentially what we're looking at there is the relationship between control and predictability. So we've got high control, high predictability, it's a clear system. Low control, low predictability, chaotic system. So this is my graph, but this is based upon the work of Dave Snowden, a systems thinker. He's a Welsh guy, and he has a framework called the Cynefin framework. That's how you spell it, Cynefin, so it's Welsh. It's really, really interesting. So it helps, it is another model that is wrong, but it's useful for me. If you're not familiar with the Cynefin framework, I'd do some, I would recommend writing that down and do some Googling and doing some reading. It's really interesting and really help your work. And essentially, what it does is it defines the complexity of a system by the relationship between the cause and the effect. So a clear system is there is an obvious relationship between cause and effect. A complicated system is there is an obvious relationship between cause and effect, but only to experts. Only if you've got domain expertise in that system. So, for example, my watch broke. Like it's a real watch, it's not like quartz or anything, it's like there's real movements in there. I wouldn't know what to do. But that's not, somebody does. There is a real relationship between cause and effect in my watch. So they know exactly how to fix my watch. Another example of a complicated problem would be going to the moon. It's one that's been talked about a lot. We think that is, us idiots working in sport. Oh, that's super complex. But if it was super complex, they wouldn't have tried it. It's obvious. There has to be a really strong relationship between cause and effect, or they're not going to take the chance of going to the moon. They knew what was going to happen. Yeah, sometimes they make a mistake. But there's experts in that understand the relationship between cause and effect. The next step up is a complex problem. It's a complex system, where there is a relationship between cause and effect, but it's only obvious to us in hindsight. after the fact. And this is one of the problems, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. And finally, this also starts with a C. Any guesses? Yeah. It's a chaotic system where there's no relationship at all between cause and effect. Think about the injuries that you may see in your sport, or the things that you're trying to do as an SSC coach. Is it clear? Is it complicated? Is it complex? Or is it chaotic? You're probably going to say, well, it's somewhere up here. There's some chaotic injuries that happen, chaotic things that happen in sport that we just do that. I don't know what happened there. And we just got to act. You know what I mean? And then we try to make sense of it. Okay, this is what it is, and then we respond to it. But doesn't happen a lot. It happens, but not a lot. This doesn't. Very rarely happens in sport. This is kind of where we operate, right? In the complicated and complex domains. What dominates in sport? So remember, the difference here is the relationship between cause and effect. We know the relationship between cause and effect here, and if you're expert, you understand exactly what's going to happen based upon what you do. And this one, you know what happened after the fact. So you did something happened, and you made sense of it. So where does sport lie? Is it complicated or complex? Complicated? So you know exactly, are you a therapist or SC coach? Therapist. So if you do something, you know exactly what the response is going to be, exactly what the adaptation is going to be.
From the perspective of the player themselves.
Yeah.
They have a fair idea of what action they take, what the outcome of that action will be on the pitch.
But there's always a direct relationship between it?
There should be a direct correlation to a lot of things you do.
Is it?
Like if you kick a pass looking for your teammate, it should, if you're good enough.
Right. So that part of the game is complicated. Some of it would maybe even be clear. Like you know exactly what it is, and just there it is. For sure. So there's parts of sport that is complicated. Absolutely, from a player's perspective. But maybe if you've got a really well-drilled team with great tactics, great strategies, and players who all know everything, maybe most of the team can. But most of what our role is as physios and SSC coaches is here.
Does experience impact which box?
Gonna get to that in a second. This is where we live. And this is how we operate within it. So we probe the system. So if there is no relation, or if there's a relationship between cause and effect, but it's only obvious to us in hindsight, we probe the system, we do something with what's called a safe-to-fail experiment. And we do something that if it doesn't work, it's okay, it's safe. We're not going to do something that if it doesn't work, everything blows up. Right? So this is what whether we're therapists or whether S&C coaches will do something. How did that work? Okay, that worked pretty good. I'll try something else, and again, and again, and again. And the more experienced you are, the more expertise you have, the more these little probes that you put in there, the more patterns you'll begin to see, and the better you'll understand this complexity. It doesn't become complicated. It just becomes a less complex problem, where you can see the relationships, or start to understand and control these relationships between all these problems. So you've got this system, which has all these things, and you begin to see the patterns form between them. And now what was 20 component parts or nodes in the system are now 4. It's still complex, but you can better understand it. So that's where experience comes in, and being consistent with your probes. Like, what are those probes? If every time that you're probing a system is something different, you don't learn from it. So you're never learning from these probes. You probe the system with a safe-to-fail experiment, whether that's an exercise, a loading parameter, a different volume, a different intensity, a different therapeutic input, whatever it is, it's just a probe. We learn from it, see what happens, okay, try again. And we just keep doing this. And we just probe it. And eventually, we start to make sense of it. And then we can respond. We get better at responding. And this is where we live in this complex world. And the people who are really good at it good therapists, good coaches, whatever, they're just better at running these safe-to-fail experiments because they've seen many of them before. So the pattern will start to develop. You say, "Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, I'll do this. I'll do that. I'll do that." Again, it comes down to identifying what matters. So again, like this, it's another model. It's wrong. It helps me. I look at all the work that I do in this complex system as it's a probe that I'm throwing in there. I'm trying to make sense of it, and then I can respond better and better and better. So it's just a model that helps me in my work. May or may not help you in yours. That's all I had for that. It's probably all I had for anything, unless we want to do a practical afterwards.
Do you still probe? Like,
Oh yeah,
do you still probe?
yeah, everything's a probe, for sure.
I thought you would have most of it.
Yeah, no, everything's a probe. And I'll make a mistake once in a while. So that wasn't a probe. That was not a safe to fail experiment. That was a not safe to fail experiment. But sometimes you have to do those too, right? All right, you know, we can do this safely, or we can just take a chance here and do something that's just, if this blows up, it blows up, and sorry.
But even in your sport, because it's literally done by stopwatch, a probe is massive. Do you suppose that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Any questions? Simon, good?
Good. I was just dying. That's why.
Oh, come plug in. I get my own, my plug in on my thing. I mean, we can talk about anything, all of that later, if you want. That's all I got. Over to you.
Right, I'm going to quickly delve into this because I talk a little bit less organised as Stu's because I last minute, but also my talk is in my suitcase at the airport because it didn't get transported to the country. So we're kind of going on the fly a little bit. But Stu touched on a lot of the things that I have in my slides. Let me get the title on.
Are you gonna come up on
No,
this?
no, good.
You gonna stay down there?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll set you up, mate.
Here, right. So we're going with. Oh, is it real white? Just Bluetooth. Thanks.
Oh, you're not plug in.
My bad. I thought it was Bluetooth.
Where is it?
Take a sheet.
Press continue.
Oh, it is?
Press continue. Yeah. Okay, now get rid of that. Yeah, get rid of that now. Press it, get out of it. Just press it a little right there. There we go. Now press OK. It'll work. Now press play.
There we go. Right, quickly, this is in reverse order to just emphasise that little discussion you had with Stu about complex and chaotic. This is Space Invaders, one of the agility drills that we do.